Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming to today's session on beating imposter syndrome and developing executive presence, brought to you by the AABA Women's Committee. For those who are not familiar with the Asian American Bar Association of the Bay Area, also known as AABA, it's been the voice of San Francisco's Bay Area Asian Pacific legal community since 1976. And AABA fosters professional development, community, and service. We are advocates and allies for civil rights, representation, and equality. AABA is also a great place to build community and connections, especially during the pandemic when we're all isolated with your fellow AAPI legal professionals. The AABA's Women's Committee is co-chaired by Joan Camagong and myself, and we focus on discussing and hosting presentations on professional development issues for AAPI men and women, such as the one being done today. If you'd like to volunteer for the Women's Committee, please feel free to reach out to Joan and myself. We're really honored today to have Rocio Perez and Oscar Garcia. Rocio is an unapologetic optimist and sought-after speaker of truth who has more than 20 years of experience providing powerful insights that have helped transform leaders around the world, from Switzerland to San Francisco. She's developed hundreds of inspiring and life-changing leadership trainings, keynotes, and presentations, and wrote an international bestseller book called Unstoppable: 7 Steps to Becoming an Intentional Leader. And she's also provided leadership and training and coached over 40,000 individuals. We also have Oscar Garcia, who is the founder and chief empowerment officer of Aspera Consulting, a Silicon Valley training and consulting firm. He is an introvert turned into an international speaker, and he's given over 400 seminars and trained over 16,000 professionals across 5 continents. He also hosts a dynamic and engaging podcast called Career Talk with OG. Over to you, Oscar and Rocio.
Well, thank you, Belinda, and thank you, AABA, for having us. Rocio, it is a pleasure to
amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, we connected virtually here to give this this talk. But let's see here if we can get some help on getting the presentation. There we go. And thank you so much. And then, so everyone, today we're going to be talking about a topic that I have personally experienced: imposter syndrome, and we're going to be talking about how to defeat it, overcome it. And then the other thing too that Rocio and I have felt that is important is, how do you then command that executive presence? So why don't we get started here? Let me just switch my screens. All right. So let's get right into it, okay? And please feel free to submit your questions, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. And then, of course, we're also going to leave some time at the end for some Q&A. So let's get into imposter syndrome. And I want to share with you just a brief little story. So I'm a first-generation professional. I'm the only one out of 10 siblings that went to college. My dad was a dishwasher. My mom worked in housekeeping. And I went to UC Berkeley. Freshman year, I remember walking onto campus and going into Wheeler Hall, 800 students in that classroom. It was Econ 101. And as an introvert, I was sitting way up in the nosebleed section. And I see my college professor walk up to the podium, taps it, quickly goes through the syllabus, and then she begins to lecture. And I was like, we're not in Kansas anymore here. I felt completely out of place. I felt unworthy. I could not understand anything that she was saying. In fact, I actually even took remedial English in college, even though in high school I got all A's in English. And talk about that imposter syndrome feeling, because all I saw on campus was 30,000 brains with 2 legs walking around like these super smart people. And I didn't certainly feel that way. Now, here's some obstacles that sometimes we encounter, that reinforces maybe sometimes this inferiority or the imposter syndrome, generational, right? In some cases, it could be generational. How we've grown up, some of the values that we've grown up with as a child. Rocio, I don't know if there's some things that you want to comment with regards to this.
Here, I completely relate to you on that, Oscar. I grew up, I'm going to share a little bit about myself and then come into the generational in just a moment. I grew up in extreme circumstances. I was a runaway at the age of 12, pregnant at 14, mama by 15, put myself through university at the age of 15 with a 6th grade education, starting there, right? Knocking on the university doors at the age of 15. I felt the imposter syndrome. I wonder why. I'm like, what are people talking about? I have no idea. Now I have to go to the library and figure out what those current events are, those topics, history, whatever was there. So I completely get that. And a lot of the times I would be in front of the classroom and in presentations wondering, like, are you seriously? Why are you listening to me? Like, I don't have anything to say that's important. And, we can all relate to those moments. And when we go into that whole generational, now moving it into the topic and figuring out, even my abuelos, and people in our family would say, hey, this is, don't think you're better than anyone else, and you have to be humble. And, all these different messages that I continue to get. And even from a cultural perspective, like mujeres, women they are not allowed to outshine a man, right? A man should be the one that is outshining the woman, taking care of things. Don't be in the spotlight. No seas creída, which is like, don't think that you're better than anyone else. Just defeating that, Oscar, I think that was one of the greatest things to look at. All those conflicting values, right? Because we have generation, we have culture, we have everything in between, even institution. When we look at gender, when I talked about here, men have the right to have those conversations and women don't. So we start to wear these capes. I call them the cape of, here, I took my grandfather's cape from the generations, like, you should be this way. And then I took it from the culture. And then I put on the cape of like gender, and continually going on after one after the other, how that strengthens our identity, that identity of thinking that we are the imposter, that I'm not good enough to be here now.
Yeah, and Rocio, you touch upon these cultural and gender, and just kind of go back with the cultural piece of it too. It reminds me too. I grew up where my dad, in the Latino culture, there's respect for your elders, and there's respect for authority. And I grew up where I would hear my dad say things like, don't show off. Let your work speak louder. Let your actions speak louder than your words. And I remember growing up, right, like being humble, being submissive was what I learned culturally. And what I realized is that as I got into my professional career, that there's also a time and a place for everything. In fact, actually, the first time, as I look back, I certainly didn't think of it when I was going through this, but as I look back, one of the first times where I had to let the world know how amazing of a person I was of a student was when I was applying to college. When you have your college applications and you're filling out your personal essay, when you go for an interview on your resume, on a cover letter, when you're an actual interview, that is when you need to let the employer know how amazing it is that you are. It's not a time to be humble, et cetera, and so forth. And we carry that even today now onto social media, and more specifically, for example, LinkedIn. And I say LinkedIn because LinkedIn is the professional platform. And sometimes people are afraid of that imposter syndrome feeling, or feel like, oh my gosh, I don't want to brag, do I want to come across like bragging and so forth.
That's fascinating. I'm going to add to that, Oscar, right here, and how the impact that we don't see. Okay, that's the time to brag, and we're not bragging. Or I even remember that we're not supposed to challenge authority, and that yes, from a generational perspective, you must respect your elders. Like I grew up saying that you can't say anything against your elders. And the impact, right? In the workplace now, here's a conversation. Before you couldn't even challenge. So why doesn't a person challenge? And even I know this is very common among our culture, that we don't look at people in the eyes. Therefore, we don't have that communication. We don't come across as that person that's confident, or that person that has it, or that person that knows what they're talking about. Let's take a look at what are those small things that we put on that cape, and we can call it cape, or we can call it mask, or whatever that may be, because we do wear that mask to be that safe. I want to be safe around mother, teacher, preacher, whoever that may be, that we learn these behaviors of shutting ourselves down and making ourselves smaller than what we really are. And we're here to shine among it.
Yeah. Well, and then we take that into also socioeconomically. I mean, I grew up on the free and reduced lunch program. We went shopping. My mom and I would go to the secondhand store, and oh my gosh, I was embarrassed to be that my friends would see me walking into the secondhand store. That's another obstacle. Which, by the way, today I have some friends that brag about going to the Goodwill. That's like a status symbol,
right? Right. And how does it really show up too, even now when we grow up not feeling like we had enough, or we were enough, or whatever all these enoughs are? From a socioeconomic, I was just in a meeting a couple of days ago where we were inviting a partner to come in, and that person saying, well, I always undercharge for my services, and I won't charge that much. And that whole thing of making ourselves small, it doesn't serve anyone. To tap into our power and to say, I'm worth it. And I remember on a stage a number of years ago, people had asked me, Rocio, well, how do you feel about the way that you're paid or whatever? I'm like, I own it. Right? I'm unapologetic about that. Okay. It took me time to get here. I've invested time, energy, money, resources, life. I've done whatever. And I also deserve, if everyone else is getting paid, why not me at this level?
Yes. And the last one, this is a big one, at least for me personally too, religion. I'm Catholic. I got the Catholic guilt going on,
I've got double guilt.
But again, these are just, folks, there's many others, but these are just some of the 5 obstacles, that impact us, right? And impact us in terms of how we show up in, outside our front door in our professional lives. So let's get into, in terms of, defeating the imposter syndrome. What are some things that we can do? But before we do that, I want to point out, we want to talk about the 5 types of imposter syndrome. And this is actually definitely got to give credit to Melanie Wilding. She wrote an article on the 5 different types of imposter syndrome. She does a phenomenal job here explaining them. But number 1, not as in number 1, as in you're the best, but just there's 5 of them here.
You're right there, Oscar, the perfectionist. You put me up there first.
Well, I mean, think about the perfectionist. I mean, I've been guilty of this too, where the person that just everything needs to be in alignment, needs to be, all the technology needs to work, need to have the right lighting, all that type of stuff that needs to happen before we take action. And some of the things that in terms of this perfectionist, I mean, ask yourself some of these questions, to see if this is kind of, you fall into this, 1, have you ever been accused of being a micromanager? Number 2, do you have difficulty delegating? Number 3, when you miss some like high goal or something that you've, set for yourself, do you feel like you're just maybe not cut out to be that person? Or another thing is, do you feel like your work must be 100% or it's not good enough, right? Now, some of the things that we can do to help us overcome this perfectionist is, 1, learn to take your mistakes in stride. Folks, one of my quotes that I say, one of the things that I say is, don't aim for perfection, but rather inspire others through your imperfections. Rocio, I don't know, some things that you might maybe want to add?
Thank you. And showing up powerfully. I remember I lived my entire life being a perfectionist. I always wanted to please mother, teacher, preacher, everyone under the moon. And it was never good enough, no matter what I did, right? I earned degree after degree. I went to school. I earned certificate after certificate, whatever it was never enough. And taking a look at that, take a look back right now. Today, I'm a recovering perfectionist. I get it. It doesn't have to be like perfect. I don't care. Like before, and we shared this presentation earlier, where in the past, I would have never even left home if I wasn't completely decked out, if my purse didn't match my belt, and if my shoes didn't match, or if these things didn't match, and whatever. And I remember the day that I finally broke through. I was on stage, okay? I'm on a stage. There's 500 people. You could only imagine. We are in LA, okay? And there's these huge screens. And there's this day, Oscar, the very first time that I decided that I would just be okay with not wearing a business jacket. And I remember my business partner telling me at the time, he goes, the day that you show up on the stage without a business jacket is the day that you arrive. Right. And I'm doing it. So I'm like bouncing up and down. We're having a great time. And my blouse comes open.
Oh, geez.
That is like the lot. And I didn't know. Okay. There's things happened. Right. And I remember turning around, somebody high-fived me right as I was coming off the stage. And I'm like, stand there. Let me take care of myself and get off the stage. And I remember sitting right next to a friend and said, that's so embarrassing. And then I shifted and I said, I'm human. Yeah. Things happen. Yeah. And after that moment, of course, things happen. So I don't wear a business jacket anymore, right? Unless I'm required to. And I'm okay with being human. I spill things. I remember one day I spilled tea on my blouse and somebody said, so embarrassing. I would have left the event. I'm human. I'm no longer going to leave that event. So it took me a moment to get there and accept whatever was and what was not. And the fact, accept my own humanity, right? I accepted enough. Why not in myself?
Yes, yes. Well, how about this one, Rocio, being the Superwoman, Superman, right? I've also experienced this as well myself as the learning English at a young age when in kindergarten, becoming my parents' translator until they passed away, and taking on basically playing that dual child parent role. And I remember my one of my quotes was, God, don't give me a lighter load, give me a stronger bat to carry this load. And boy, did he give me some strong loads. But this is another one, that you feel that if you are not taking on more responsibilities or et cetera and so forth, that you, for some reason, are just not worthy, phony. Again, some questions. Yes, go ahead.
I've had meetings here in the past where I've been on boards. At one point, I was on 13 boards. Actually, the work that I had was I was working on my business 10% of the time, and the rest of the percent of the time, 90% of it, I was working on boards and commissions. And it was just fascinating to see that. And every time somebody said something, I felt obligated. Okay. So I don't know how many of you feel obligated. Somebody says something and you know how to do it. And it's like, oh, okay, I'll get it. Okay, I'll take on another thing. And I'll take on another thing. Yeah. And then by the time it's all said and done, I'm not even I wasn't even growing my business at that time. Because I just felt so obligated. Oh, okay, I've got the capacity. Oh, yes, I'm a first gen. I'm leading the way. I'm doing whatever. As opposed to say, what can I do to support people? Maybe one organization. There's a limit, boundaries, barriers. Go ahead.
Yes. Well, and to add to what you're saying, I mean, some of the things, if you're wondering whether this is you or not, think about, do you get stressed when you're not working, and do you find that downtime completely a waste of time? Like, do you have to, like, you're on the computer, especially over this last year, you're on the computer and then you go sit on the couch, and then now you pick up your phone and you're checking your email on your phone, and you were just checking it on the computer. What about some of your hobbies or some of the things that you're just really passionate about? Have you just kind of set those to the wayside, put them on the back burner? You're not doing those things? Or another one is that, all the degrees, despite all the credentials and so forth that you have, that maybe it's just not good enough, that you just need to continue to pursue more. Anything, Garcia, you might want to add on this?
You just brought up a very important one. I remember when I was going after my PhD, I was 36 years old and I was going after it like my life depended on it. What I didn't realize at that point is that I didn't feel safe, right? There's how do I create safety for myself? Like school is a safe haven and a place that I can be in education and so forth. To really understand, where does this come from? Is this behavior that I would want to live forever? Because we must be willing to change, right? We must be willing to create a new version of ourselves. This is something that just happened by default, right? Because we got it, as we put it on the first slide, through generation, through culture, through religion, through everything. So how do we be here now?
Yeah, that's
and
true.
Belinda put on there 13 boards, she's like, so me, right? It's so interesting. How do we get ourselves into those things, and how do we get ourselves out of it? I remember my coach, I'll share this and move forward, Oscar. My coach one day had me put everything on a spreadsheet. I wasn't even aware of it. It's like, okay, I'm the commissioner for the women for the city of Denver, and I'm on this board and that board and everything. And until I saw it on that spreadsheet, and until I started to decommit, then my life started to change completely. Having peace of mind, like now downtime was fun. Everything wasn't an obligation right here, right now. Now we're talking about the natural genius. Take that one away.
Well, this is not me. I think I met you probably at the other end of the spectrum here. Okay. but I have known some people that, my gosh, very intelligent. I mean, definitely very, very intelligent. I've been in awe, especially when I was in Berkeley, some roommates. And the thing with the natural genius is that they judge themselves more on how quickly or easy it is for them to grasp a concept versus the actual effort that is required to learn that. And if you're, again, just providing you some questions, if you're wondering if this is kind of, you might fall into this type of imposter syndrome personality, here's a question to ask, yourself: are you used to excelling without putting much effort? Okay. Do you have a track record of getting straight A's or the gold stars in everything that you do? Failure for you is never an option. Okay. Failing is like, oh my gosh, right? Or another one is, were you, growing up as a child, were you told frequently that you were the smart one? Right, you're the smart one in the family or in your peer group. So those are just some questions, to ask in terms of the natural genius.
And what's the impact on that? I know for me, I have a combination of each of those. And looking at that natural genius, this isn't enough. Like it was never enough, and it was so easy. Sometimes I wanted it to be harder, right? It's quite funny, right?
Yes.
Let me show you how to create this puzzle in an easy way. It doesn't have to be hard. And it's part of it where we think it's so easy that it shouldn't come that easy. How do we shift from that point to where we want to be?
Yeah. Well, and the thing too, Rocio, to your point, is for the natural genius, one thing to remember, to keep in mind is that we're all a work in progress. We all are. I do not consider myself a phenomenal speaker. I arrived or anything. No, I'm a work in progress. In fact, I will always be a work in progress. And I think that's something for a natural genius to keep in mind.
And nobody taught us that, right? Because that's something so important right there, Oscar. Nobody taught us that we're a work in progress from the day that we are born to the day that we leave this world, to know that we're constantly evolving. A tree evolves, a flower evolves. We have all these natural processes that we go through. And this morning I had an amazing breakthrough, and I'm thinking, wow, now I get to take that into my life, every area. Into the soloist. I'm the only one that can do this. Have you ever heard yourself saying that? No, I got this. Nobody knows how to do this. Nobody can do this, right?
Yes. I've been guilty of this too as well. I took care of my parents for about 6-7 years before they passed away, and I just felt like I can do it all. And it took a toll on me and my relationships. But one of the things with this, the soloist too, is that ask yourself, do you ever feel like Rocio said, that you're the only one that can accomplish that particular task responsibility? Do you view it as a sign of weakness to ask for help? And also, the other thing to think about is, do you frame requests in terms of the requirements based on the project versus just the needs of the person? Those are some things to think about as the soloist.
And there may be some shame too. Sometimes we have shame of asking for help. I don't want people to know that I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And yet we'll spend an entire week. Let's be honest. I've been guilty of that, right? Spend an entire week trying to do something that I have no idea how to do. That if somebody would have sat down with me in an hour, I would have had it figured out, right? We would have figured it out together. And yet we invest more time in trying to do this, that, and the other. It's time to do that. Oh, here we go. There's the expert. Now we've got it, right?
Yeah. Well, and you know what? The expert here, this is someone who is focused based on what or how much they know. Okay. And sometimes the expert shies away, for example, from a career standpoint, from applying to a job because they just don't feel qualified. Okay. Like, in fact, when I did a career transition from tech to the chamber world as a chamber executive, this is how I felt. I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm like completely unqualified. I can't do this job, et cetera, and so forth. And the other thing too, the expert is constantly seeking training because they just feel like they just can never master something. And one of the things that I believe in, and I say this, is activity beats perfection. Activity meaning from the standpoint that you might not know something, but if you just keep doing it, eventually you will improve on that skill set. A year ago, hardly anyone was doing Zoom or StreamYard trainings. And, now I've gotten used to speaking to a silly little camera. In fact, I can't even see anyone that's on there right now. So speaking. So I could very well be speaking to the wall.
Right. No, I think it was so fascinating, right, Oscar? Because sometimes from an expert perspective, we wait. And like I said, I'm a combination of all of these. We wait, wait until I get it perfect enough. Wait until this and that. And now it's like, forget it. If we put out the flyer and it's not perfect, I can always update that flyer. I can always do. Perfection never made it to the table, right? It never made it to the plate. How do we get into it until we learn how to do things? And that's how I guide my team now. In the past, it was like, oh, I can't make these decisions. I can't do this. And we can't. No, forget it. You know what? This is what we know now. Go as far as we can. Evaluate the situation. Learn what we need to learn in that moment. And then go further and repeat the process over and over again.
Yes, definitely. So let's talk about how, folks, we can regain our power. And Rocio?
Definitely, like self-analysis. I love asking myself questions. Where did this come from? How is this impacting me? Right? When we're looking at celebrating our wins, how do we celebrate our wins here now? I'll talk a little bit more about self-talk in a moment too, because that one's must come in there, right? It's what we're telling ourselves when we celebrate our wins. I remember there was a point in my career that I was celebrating everyone's wins. You thought they were going to give me like the Nobel Prize, okay? Celebrating, yes. I was like, we had this activity in one of the first conferences, transformational conferences that I went to. And they had us go around complimenting people. You would have thought that they were going to give me the prize. I never even allowed one person to say anything to me. I was the one who had to do it. And that was the moment that I realized that I was feeling like an imposter, that I wasn't good enough, that I couldn't contribute enough, that everybody was better than me. And one of the things that I learned to do is to talk with others, talk with someone who's been through that. Maybe they can help you shine some light on what's going on, because we don't see our blind spots, right? Yes. Everybody sees it. We just don't, right? So that's where that great spot of getting feedback. Now I love feedback. I love hearing people say, hey, Rocio, sometimes when you're presenting or talking to people, it's like they're just your focal attention. I'm like, yes, they are, right? And sometimes I've forgotten that I have an audience around me, and I must cater to that audience. I remember when networking, it's like tunnel vision. And now I have 10 people in front of me that I must connect with. Self-talk. Here's a great thing about self-talk. I remember this with my grandson, who is now 6 years old. When he was 4, Oscar, I threw a ball to Emilio, and Emilio was catching the ball like this. Of course, he's not going to catch it, and he's crying, I can't catch the ball, I can't catch the ball. And then he starts catching the ball that weekend, crossing his arms. Okay, we've made some improvement, right? He's still not catching the ball. So the next weekend when I went over, I'm like, come on, Emilio, let's go play ball. And he's like, no, Grandma, I can't play ball. I can't catch the ball. And I can't catch the ball. And I'm like, come on, Emilio, you can catch the ball. And I throw the ball. And I'm like, stop. What is Emilio telling himself right now? I can't catch the ball.
Yeah.
What if I change that self-talk to Emilio, right?
Yeah.
Emilio, repeat after me. And he's standing in front of me. He's like, I've got this ball. I'm like, I've got this. And I'm like, Emilio, repeat. I've got this. You've got this. I've got this. I've got this. And so I throw the ball, and Emilio catches the ball, and he flies across the room. And he's like, I want to see. Because at that point I was recording him on my phone. When I see this little kid bouncing up and down, he's like, I got this. I got this. I got this. That is the state of mind that we can get ourselves in, because, let's be honest. You and I were here before this event started. We were bouncing up and down too, right? Like we practiced, right? We're getting ourselves in a positive state, listening to our favorite music, dancing a little cha-cha-cha around, and then we jump on stage, right? And it's what we tell ourselves and how we can change it and reframe our experience, because there's nothing different between somebody having a nervous attack and somebody being super excited. There's nothing different. Scientifically, there's no difference. How do we shift that? And here's another way of shifting really quickly. Check our body out, right? Because if we're slouched even a little bit, we get less oxygen. So make sure that chest is open, chin is up, that we're breathing deeply. Those things help tremendously. And to start talking with ourselves, like, I've got this. I've got this. I know my content.
No, that's definitely true. So, folks, let's move into some executive presence here. What are some things that we can do? We talked about, obviously, ways to defeat the imposter syndrome. Let's talk about how we can command that executive presence. So, first of all, growing up for a long time, and even early in my professional career, the word executive just seems so scary to me. Oh my gosh, we got the VP, the executive team is coming. I'm like, right, like all scared and so forth. But folks, can I tell you something? Leadership is influence. Being in an executive role, and commanding that executive presence, to me, is really commanding that leadership presence. And whether you sit behind a mahogany desk or you clean a mahogany desk, you have the ability to influence people. My parents, 6 years ago, when they passed away, first my dad, 4 months later, like I told you before, dishwasher, my mom worked in housekeeping. By society standards, there were nobody. Yet their funeral service, standing room only, out the door, people coming to pay their respects. And it hit me. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's really, again, about the influence, the impact that you have in people's life. The other thing, too, with commanding that executive presence, some of the things that foundations that are important is to identify what is our core values. What do we really stand for? What's important? For me personally, when I boil it down to its lowest common denominator, and why I'm doing what I'm doing today here, is because I love helping people dream bigger. I love inspiring them, and I love serving. I love helping people. That's what I do. And by having these core values, they serve kind of like a true north compass, right? You kind of get veered off track, and you can see, like, oh, I need to get back on track here. But any thoughts?
Yeah, so I live by that. I just shared that this morning, on the gifts of life, love, kindness, and courage. And am I showing up like that every day? Yeah. Do I show up not just for others? Am I showing up like that for myself? Am I being kind? Am I showing up with those gifts of love, kindness, courage? Am I taking courageous actions in it because I deserve it? Knowing that personal why will get us through those most difficult moments that we may have, because we're all, let's be honest, right? We're all going to encounter difficult moments. Some of us were hit even more through COVID than others, and seeing how do we move beyond this? How do I move from here to the future? If I could see the future, I can be in the future. And I'll repeat that one, because I know that one goes really quick. If I could see the future, I can be in the future for myself. Our why will pull us through the future.
Yep. Folks, the other thing too is, in terms of helping us command that executive presence, is living on purpose. And I want to give you some points here of what I mean by living on purpose. First of all, I think it's important to always be grateful. Earlier today, I did a career development talk webinar, and I was asked, the question, Oscar, what is like the thing that you do, first thing that you do in the morning? And this is just my personal story, folks. And my answer is prayer. To me, my spiritual life is very important. It puts me in a frame of mind to always be grateful for what it is that I have. And again, this is something that, especially in this last year pandemic, we have seen so many instances. We've heard of instances where, unfortunately, either a loved one or friends they're not with us anymore. And so just being grateful. The other thing too is being intentional, like doing things on point, on purpose, right? That is also important. I think being vulnerable is another thing. And the thing, though, this goes counter to corporate America, right? To be vulnerable in corporate America, we're taught to be strong, like don't wear your heart on your sleeve, et cetera, and so forth. And I quite frankly think it's the opposite. If you follow me, for example, on LinkedIn, you see that I share a lot of personal stories, and life lessons, because at the end of the day, it's about connecting with the person's heart, not connecting with them intellectually. It's a human being. And then lastly is being enthusiastic for what you do. I mean, I'm fired up. I'm starting right now. That's what you're doing, folks. I've not had that. But, whatever energy I have left right now before I eat, I'm fired up and excited. Okay?
Right. I love that, Oscar. And, the gratitude is one of the biggest things for me in life, right? Getting myself centered, focused, meditation. I went through 2 meditation practices this morning for an entire hour and a half before even got out of bed, right? That's so important for me to be centered, to be focused, to be intentional with what I desire to do. I set my intention. It's on my journal every single day. I start with the intention. What does it look like for every day? And being vulnerable, there's a distinction, and let's make that distinction, because a lot of us think, and you have amazing examples of being vulnerable. A lot of us think that vulnerability it's one thing to be vulnerable, and the other thing is to feel vulnerable. Mm-hmm. Okay, 2 very different things. Being vulnerable, I'm sharing, hey, I was a teenage runaway. Nothing wrong. I own everything about me, right? I'm a runaway. I was a dropout. People are like, you were a dropout. Yes, and I own it, right? Like, there's nothing I can do to change it, right? I have nothing to hide, and I'm unapologetic about it. And then to also really look at the vulnerability, that's what connects, right? But to feel vulnerable, it's like, I feel like I'm under attack. If I say something, how many of us, right? Because I was there, where somebody would say something, it's like, oh, they're saying something about me or whatever. And then I feel like I'm being under attack and not moving forward. And then, of course, it's always the joy that you bring into everything. And I love that about you, living on purpose, by intention, on intention, right?
Yes. There is one more thing, folks, that I want to share with you about living on purpose, and that is be a giver, not a taker. Always give more than you take. That is part of commanding that executive presence. 3 things we'll leave, and we'll open it up to some questions here. As far as executive presence, if you forget anything that Rocio and I have said, number 1, you want to command executive presence, talk less, listen more. You're going to find leaders talk less, listen more. Number 2, Leaders brag less and they compliment more. Never be afraid to compliment people. And lastly, number 3, and I just kind of said this previously, and that is take less and give more. These are the 3 things that I encourage you to do. If you forget anything about commanding executive presence, if you do these 3 things, you are already commanding executive presence, and it doesn't matter what your title is. Any thoughts, Rocio?
Definitely. And saying, what specifically is it to seek to understand others? Where are you coming from? Like, I want to know where that person, because we have all these blanket statements. Well, I really like to work in community. Well, let's connect. Where specifically, right? Even that word right there, specifically, do you like to contribute in community? Why does it make your heart sing? How can I support you in that area? That's really that commanding executive presence. When you're talking about complimenting, of course, it's amazing when you can acknowledge and stand in front of somebody and say, I acknowledge you for your hard work. I acknowledge you for stepping up to the plate on this particular project. I really acknowledge your leadership. And you can sit there and say 5 or 10 things to this person, and you'll see how that individual lights up and how we start to connect at a very different level. And then, of course, taking less, giving more. Where can I give more? How can I make other people's lives even better?
Yes.
And also honor myself at the same time.
Yes, definitely. So, folks, if you can, let us know. Drop it in the comments so far what you thought. We accept all feedback like we mentioned in the beginning. You can even go negative numbers. You can go triple digit positive too. Okay. It's all welcomed. Okay. Here is Rocio's contact information. Welcome to reach out to her, call her, email her, go to her website, inventivaconsulting.com. And then obviously you can also find on Amazon as well. And then you can also, you can connect with us on LinkedIn.
Also, we can also get autographed copies individually as well. So send me a message on LinkedIn. More than happy to send you that information and the link.
Yes. And, again, here's my social media handles on LinkedIn, Instagram. Also have a podcast called Career Talk with OG. And on the bottom left is my email website address. So I'm going to turn it over to Belinda here and see if any questions.
Okay, I think we don't have audio just yet. Here's one of the questions that I love that always comes up where people are in the midst of life, right? As a matter of fact, I had this conversation with my friend this morning. He's telling me, Rocio, how can I be that mortgage lending individual expert when I was unemployed? How can I show up right here, right now? And it's fascinating, right? Because we have that internal conversation going in our head and like, who am I? Who am I to be giving you advice, right? And in this case, maybe the attorney's like, who am I to be giving you advice and whatever? Or when people are in that midst of the chaos, because sometimes it's internal chaos. It's not what people are saying. It is what's going on inside of us. And how do we shift that conversation? Again, for me, there's nothing beats a good night's sleep. Okay. Nothing beats making sure that we're well hydrated, that we get proper movement, whatever movement means to you, whatever focusing and centering. And for you, I know you said it's prayer. For me, it's meditation, and it's another form of prayer, right? And making sure, like, all of us have our own different things. How do we do that right here, right now? I know we have some questions here, and I'll turn it over to.
I think Belinda, Yes, Belinda.
Yeah. I was, it's interesting because I'm also thinking about how to apply this to attorneys, which is a lot of our audience, and also being people of color and women. So I love this concept, Rocio, that you brought up about vulnerability, because you hear a lot about leadership now and influence being about vulnerability and yet being strong. So this kind of intersection is fascinating, especially in our roles as attorneys, because, our role is to be the attack person, the voice of the company, and yet a lot of strength is shown for being a vulnerable leader. So can you talk about how do you navigate both in an effective way?
Most definitely. I'll let Oscar answer that one first.
So, first of all, vulnerability is a strength. Okay, and you're right, Belinda. We do need to reframe it. See, I'll tie it back to my own cultural upbringing. See, in the Mexican culture, there's a lot of the machismo, right? The male chauvinistic, my dad was a patriarch and all that type of stuff. And even in the music that you listen to, it's like, growing up, men don't cry, suck it up and all this type of stuff. But the reality is that we all have feelings. We all have feelings. And what I have realized is that, as I mentioned earlier, that at the end of this virtual stream, at the end of that email, that phone call, there is a human being. There is a human being. And I also observed this when my parents passed away in their eulogy. It is, what is the legacy that you want to leave behind? What is the impact that you want to have on other people? And if you don't really right now aren't thinking about other people, and maybe you have your own kids, what is the impact that you want to leave behind for your kids, the example? And for me, is the example for my kids is being someone, not a strong person, but a person of strength. Because that incorporates that vulnerability, and it also incorporates the fact that, hey, I have lost it emotionally too as well.
And how do you live for yourself, right? Or what is that message that you're living into? I love that, Oscar. I'm a person of strength, not a strong person, a person of strength. And how does that person show up? I just flew into California until LA yesterday. This is one of the signs that I brought with me, and that's like, I am a woman worth becoming. This is what's in front of me all day, every day. And it sits on my lights because I brought my lights with me. And it's always on my lights, right? Because that's who I desire to be, right? That's who every day that I'm reminding myself, who is that woman worth becoming? And how does she show up? Is she vulnerable? Is she authentic? Is she empathetic? Does she love herself as much as she loves others, right? And will she fight courageously for herself? Will she put herself first? And part of putting ourselves first, sometimes we must be uncomfortable, right? Every time we get out of these behaviors that we learn, whether it was generational or cultural, religion, or whatever that may be, gender, that when we step out of that, it may be uncomfortable. And everything is uncomfortable until it becomes comfortable. Let's be frank, right? I remember I was here in California, actually near El Pomar Airport. It was fascinating. We went to an assisted daycare for kiddos that needed help, extra help, and their parents would drop them off to get a respite and so forth. And this little girl who was 13 years old walked by. She's like, yeah, everything is hard until it becomes easy. And that stuck with me. I'm like, wow, this little girl's got it. And it is. Everything is unfamiliar until it becomes familiar, until we become familiar with our new behaviors. Really, who we came here to be is amazing. Who we came here to be is extraordinary. Who we came here to be is to share our gifts and to shine our light and to connect with others. There's nothing that feels amazing about feeling like we're an imposter. Let's just be honest. Let's put it out there, right? There's nothing that I'm like, oh yes, Oscar, do you really feel like an imposter today, right? So let's challenge that, and feedback is part of it too, especially when we're feeling like an imposter. When we start to learn and accept that feedback is part of the journey, where we can help and grow and help people shine light on that and transcend what we're doing. That there's nothing wrong. Feedback is just feedback. It's just information. Nothing against us. It's information. So if it triggers us, let's find a way to transcend that trigger. So if you're being triggered by any of those, give us a call. I work with people who have triggers all the time. Sometimes we get triggers by our triggers. I used to be one of those, right? The only reason I do this work is because I've been there and I've done that. I know what it feels like And I know how to get out of it and really stand as a confident woman. I have so many women come up to me after my presentations. They're like, Rocio, I see you're amazing. I wish I could stand on a stage like you do and do what you do. And here's what I say to others: any one of us can do it. And I show them.
Yes, definitely.
And Rocio and Oscar, there's something wrong with my camera. However, one more question, and this may be the perfect segue into that other question, is given how amazing your stories are, coming from different backgrounds and the adversities that you feel, and I'm sure being, person of color and women, you would have encountered different like microaggressions and challenges over time. And yet, whenever I speak with you, you guys are the most inspiring, positive people I know. And so what are some of the practices that you do in order to stay positive and stay present and really build that resilience? Because I've read books on, the most successful people are people who are most persistent and resilient. So would love your thoughts on this.
Okay, so first of all, Belinda, I'm probably one of the most selfish people that you will ever meet. I'm just going to call it like it is. Okay? I get up and I take care of me, because if I have not taken care of me, I have nothing to give anyone. And that includes my meditation practice. That includes my movement practice. That includes my listening to positive affirmations. As a matter of fact, I have a game, the Mind Shift game, that helps people through very specific affirmations to build themselves even stronger. It includes my self-talk. What do I tell myself? Like, Rocio, you're amazing, like celebrate. I mentioned in one of our last presentations where people come to me and like, Rocio, you're a great writer. It's like, and what do people think about your writing? I'm like, I don't care, right? Like, I write for me. I share it with them because it helps them. And because I feel so good about my contribution. That's what's amazing. So what would I tell other people? I'd say just that, make sure that you have a practice, because when we are filled, when we are anchored, when our personal needs are taken care of, and let's just be honest, sometimes as women, we're not very good about that. We're taking care of our husbands and our kids and mother, teacher, preacher, everyone under the moon, and we've put ourselves last. And then we wonder why we get burned out. I'd say that, no wonder heart disease is number one for women. And that's been a huge issue. How do we take care of us here now? How do we be those selfish individuals who can take care of themselves and put on their mask first before they start doing it for others? Find a practice. Feed yourself first. Give that to yourself first. Pay yourself, whatever that means. We have my friend and I, we talk about paying ourselves first, serving ourselves first, and then serving others. Awesome.
Yeah. So there's three things, Belinda. That's a great question. Three things that I do, in addition to what Rocio mentioned. But one is, it goes back to what I mentioned earlier, knowing what my values are, or what I would call my true north, of why I do what I do. And it reminds me of, it's like being a parent. My kids are now adults, but when you become a parent, I mean, you're going to have some rough times with your kids. You're going to get sick. You're going to get tired. All this, you're going to feel like you want to send them back, but obviously you can't. So, because your value is being that of a parent. So regardless of the tough times and ups and downs and all that, you stay committed there, as a parent. Number two, I think it's important. And sometimes we know this and we tell our kids this, and we are very diligent and observant on who our kids associate with, who are their friends. But that power of association does not change when we're adults. In fact, some of us adults need to do some spring cleaning and stop hanging out with certain people, because some of these people were catching their emotional cold. And it's like, I need to distance myself. I don't say hate on them or anything like that. No, but we need to set some boundaries, because some of these people, especially some of our loved ones, are dragging us down. And thirdly is the importance of what it is that we tell ourselves. And Rocio touched upon this earlier about that self-talk, super critical. I mean, I also, listen, I have a hole on my wall from a TV that used to be there. I don't watch TV. I don't, not even Netflix. Okay. Why? Because I don't know. I just rather be more intentional on what I feed my mind than have the temptation of like, oh, let me just binge watch. When was the last time anyone binge watched on positivity?
Right. And let me add to that. That one's something so important. For the last decade, I don't own a television. I don't watch TV. You walk into my living room, there is no TV. Okay. That is not the way that I live. And everything impacts us. The music, the TV, people's conversations. Like if somebody was to walk into your bedroom right now and have 3 bags of stinky compost that's worms are coming out of it, and they were to throw it all over your bed, would you allow them? Let me tell you what, people are doing that right now with their conversations, with the music that we're listening to, with the TV that we're watching. You're like, I don't want to wake up in the morning and hear that there was 3 murders and 2 car crashes and a chase down the street and somebody got abused. I don't have any space because that only adds to me. Whatever it is that comes into me adds to who I am being and how I show up in the world.
Yeah. Awesome.
I think we're at the end there.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Rocio and Oscar, for this wonderful presentation. I know I personally learned a lot, and there was so much there to relate to. You can connect with Rocio and Oscar on LinkedIn, and they do a lot of leadership training and coaching, and they're wonderful folks, as you can tell. And thank everybody for attending today's Imposter session, hosted by the AABA Women's Committee. And feel free to reach out to AABA for more of these enriching events. Thank you so much. Take care.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Bye.